Tonight, on 24, the fate of the Strait of Hormuz awaits a final agreement in Tehran. Reports suggest Iran's understanding with Oman over shipping routes and transit fees in the Persian Gulf has been finalized. Heavy Houthi attacks on Yemeni government forces positions leave hundreds dead and wounded in one of the deadliest clashes in recent years. Riyadh's fresh responses to ongoing threats in the region, a multinational coalition, and expanding military cooperation with Britain. From the Iran International Studio, this is 24 with Fardad Farahzad. Greetings to Iran International viewers worldwide. Following reports of a potential U.S.-Iran deal, IRGC-affiliated Fars news agency, citing an informed source, reported that Tehran and Muscat have reached an understanding regarding ship entry and exit routes in the Strait of Hormuz. Under this agreement, following a transition period, all maritime transit will move through a central corridor, with transit fees determined by the specific services provided. Meanwhile, indirect talks between Tehran and Washington are nearing their final stages, and the Islamic Republic's foreign minister is expected to travel to Islamabad in the coming days. Our reporter Marzia Hosseini joins us from the U.S. Congress. Marzia, from inside Iran, it seems like they are reaching a deal with Oman, but on the American side, we haven't really heard much yet about whether they agree with the details of this potential deal or not.
The key point is that this isn't a full deal yet. Iran and Oman have only agreed on new shipping coordinates in the Strait of Hormuz. However, the core conflict is between Iran and the U.S. Once negotiations wrap up, Iran will still face around a dozen U.S. warships blockading the passage. They will ultimately have to return to the table with the Americans to actually reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Consequently, only about 50% of the Islamic Republic's overall issue has been resolved so far. The Americans say it's impossible for them to agree to two things. One, that the Islamic Republic would want to collect transit fees, and two, that the Islamic Republic would want to inspect and audit all the ships passing through. Regarding specifically the second point, based on this memorandum that we're talking about right now, the story goes that in the Strait of Hormuz, since 1968, if I'm not mistaken, there was a route set by international organizations where ships passed right through the middle, neither reporting up to Iran nor down to Oman. Currently, the Islamic Republic has laid so many naval mines along this vital maritime corridor that it has become virtually unnavigable for commercial vessels. However, following weeks of detailed negotiations, both sides have finally sat down and reached a temporary understanding. Initially, the Islamic Republic demanded that all maritime traffic pass exclusively through the northern route, near Iranian waters. The Omanis firmly rejected this proposal, asking, "What about our share?" Under the newly agreed compromise, ships must now enter through Iran's designated route and exit via Oman's route, requiring vessels to report to both authorities for the time being. And later, which Mr. Vafai says is a matter of a few months, they should go back to that original route, with mine clearance likely taking place or whatever, and pass through a middle route. But the second condition that the Americans probably won't agree to is this issue of transit fees, because now, not just the US, but 8 countries have sent letters to the UN saying the Strait of Hormuz consists of international waterways. Where did transit fees come from? As a result, the Islamic Republic is now talking about a plan where initially they said, we want 9% of the cargo value, meaning not only should ships report to us, but we'll go inspect their cargo to see how much they have and how much it's worth, and they pay 9% as a fee under whatever name. And now they backtracked saying, well, it's not quite like that, maybe up to 7%, but it's not called a fee, it's called transit service charges, like environmental protection policy fees, and statements like that. Iran and Oman are supposed to split this between themselves, creating conditions the U.S. is unlikely to accept, based on Trump's latest remarks. Trump stated he won't grant the Islamic Republic permission, emphasizing that any funds should go to the U.S. instead of Iran. Congressional sentiment aligns completely with this stance. Today, Republican Senator Todd Young discussed this situation regarding the Strait of Hormuz during an interview. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Well, I hope the war ends soon, but
Well, I hope the war ends soon, but this end must come with the right conditions, meaning we must ensure that we can gain control of the nuclear material buried under the mountain. Of course, the Strait of Hormuz also needs to reopen. However, it's unclear if we have enough leverage to achieve these goals. So I think it makes sense to continue the economic blockade on Iran and gradually increase pressure on its economy. Also, bombardment should stop, unless in response to similar actions by the Iranians. This approach gives us time in the long run to replenish our ammunition stocks and find alternative routes for transporting oil and gas from the Persian Gulf. I also think it ensures that when we sit down at a negotiating table again, we'll have high credibility and bargaining power. This is my proposed plan, but I welcome any successful plan the president can execute. Today, he hinted at a potential breakthrough.
Well, Fardad, as this gentleman himself mentioned, their emphasis is on the blockade, on economic sanctions. It doesn't seem like they want to accept these conditions set by the Islamic Republic. Touching on that last point, these sanctions this individual, meaning Senator Young, is talking about, right now as we speak, here in the halls of the U.S. Congress, they are discussing the so-called Lindsey Graham sanctions on Iran and Russia that were supposed to be finalized this week. If not finalized today, it'll likely be finalized after the U.S. lawmakers' summer recess, opening what they call a new chapter of U.S. sanctions on the Islamic Republic.
Thank you, Marzia Husseini, reporting from Congress. We have breaking news in these past few minutes. Reports have been published from Iran, both by social media users and by some domestic Iranian news agencies, that explosion sounds have been heard in Keshm and Bandar Abbas in southern Iran. It's not yet clear what caused these explosion sounds, or whether it had anything to do with the clashes between Iran and the U.S. But we know that in recent weeks, the U.S. has struck positions in southern Iran multiple times, including in Keshm and Bandar Abbas. One eye is naturally on southern Iran, and as soon as we get more details, we will bring them to you. In Tehran, however, a member of the parliament's presiding board told Fars news agency that the initial draft of the Strait of Hormuz security bill is currently under review in the National Security Commission. According to Ali Reza Salimi, under this plan, the passage of U.S., Israeli, and according to him, other hostile countries' vessels would be banned, and fines of up to 20% of the cargo's value are being considered for lawbreakers. My colleague Kambiz Tavana joins us from Washington. Kambiz, operationally speaking, how feasible is this agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz?
Fardad, an interesting development has emerged regarding this matter, in parallel with what Marzia was explaining about the ongoing discussions in the U.S. Congress, where lawmakers hold their own distinct and strongly voiced opinions. A remarkably similar bill has now been introduced in the Iranian parliament. Members of the Iranian legislature are currently weighing in and offering their own commentary on it as well. It seems almost synchronized, as if both political sides simply want to be able to state, well, we have finally brought this issue up for official debate, and now let's allow the remaining officials to carry it out. However, when I was speaking with several foreign policy experts earlier today, and following a rather lengthy interview I conducted with the president of the Center for the National Interest, which will be broadcast soon, the central discussion here was quite significant. This means we need to dissect it a bit further and unpack the underlying language a little bit more to clearly illuminate this concept that has been introduced as, so to speak, a toll, transit fee, or whatever similar payment. It was fundamentally a calculated political initiative presented by the Islamic Republic of Iran, largely because the U.S. had explicitly stated beforehand and firmly declared that I will under no circumstances allow any fee or money to be transferred under these current conditions. And to avoid that money creating the suspicion that the U.S. government is paying an amount for something, they came up with an initiative in the middle to set up a fund or designate a place. And under the name of some kind of service, any fee that is supposed to be released in exchange for one of the actions Iran takes, say a fee gets released to be transferred and go through, mainly because the Islamic Republic wants to tell those inside who are protesting this, yes, we found, so to speak, a function for it. We're collecting something under this name from them. But that function isn't really transit or, so to speak, a toll.
Another thing that's happened is that when they discuss how Iran and Oman are practically behind the scenes this is happening, where Iran wants both the US military operations to stop and that ring of military pressure that the US has put there to be at least stopped or at least pushed back a bit so they can transit. They've named it Iran and Oman because Iran said, we won't negotiate with the US, but the US has no problem and says we are talking. Now, it doesn't matter what they call it.
ایران و عمان به خاطر اینکه ایران گفته که ما با آمریکا مذاکره.
However, the US doesn't mind, stating, we are talking, making the label irrelevant now.
There are two issues going on right now. First, if any financial transfer is to take place, under what framework will it be done, which they've called that transit fund or whatever name they bring there. Second, that discussion about, so to speak, the rhetoric or language regarding which ship can or cannot pass is mostly wordplay, because this is what the Islamic Republic does in many places to bypass sanctions.
که این کاری که جمهوری اسلامی با خیلی جا برای رفع
Numerous commercial vessels frequently encounter significant transit restrictions due to their specific ownership or cargo origins. To circumvent these obstacles, operators often attempt to navigate these waterways by reflagging under a neutral nation's flag. However, such proposals are largely political rhetoric intended to appease concerned onlookers, rather than viable policies. They lack any practical mechanism for actual implementation. What has actually materialized is a distinct strategic plan recently put forward by Qatar and Pakistan. Proponents are suggesting that all active hostilities and ongoing conflicts should be immediately frozen or placed on hold. The objective is to allow the diplomatic process, originally outlined in the prior agreement, to finally move forward into implementation. However, successfully reactivating this framework strictly requires a total and verified cessation of attacks from both sides involved. Unfortunately, neither party has taken the necessary steps to stop the violence, leaving the entire peace process at a complete standstill for the time being. As a result, the primary objective right now is to see who can effectively implement a ceasefire on that side in such a way that no single vessel or ship comes under direct attack. Meanwhile, from this side, the United States can also publicly assert that because a ceasefire has officially taken hold over there, they will likewise refrain from firing at anyone from their end. That core dynamic is where the immediate conflict currently rests. However, the specific vocabulary and diplomatic rhetoric being used today, so to speak, does not genuinely capture or reflect the real substantive debate actually taking place. Fardad.
But over these past few days, this issue of military weapons shortage, especially missiles, which is said to be one of the reasons for halting the war, has been brought up a lot. It reached the mainstream media. There are even reports that Mr. Trump had a heated argument with Pete Hegseth in the White House Situation Room. Now, he himself denied it, saying we have enough weapons. And Mr. Trump also said Hegseth is a great asset in his cabinet. But either way, the reactions have been very strong.
That's right. The Washington Post recently published a detailed report. Looking at it from a particular perspective, the report itself becomes quite fascinating. This is because right within the published text, it explicitly noted, we requested an official response from the White House. And White House officials firmly stated these claims are complete fabrications and stories, maintaining that no such incident ever occurred. On the other hand, the journalists explicitly requested an official response from the Pentagon regarding the matter. The Pentagon clearly stated these don't exist at all. Despite this firm denial, the outlet chose to move forward and publish the piece as a lead story anyway, merely appending a brief note at the bottom stating, we made these two requests for comment and they gave us such answers. Within just an hour or two of the article going live, both White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt and Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell took to X, formerly Twitter, to voice their frustration, publicly reacting by stating, we explicitly told them there's no such thing, yet they published this. However, just a few hours ago, Donald Trump personally took to Truth Social once more, explicitly stating, we told them in various ways that such news isn't true, and in my opinion, they did this to sabotage diplomacy. Ultimately, this entire news article reported by the Washington Post traces directly back to a comprehensive CSIS study released a little over a month ago, which clearly highlighted that the active strategic stockpiles currently in use are running dangerously low. While it is certainly true that official figures prefer not to discuss this delicate issue publicly, it is worth pointing out, Fardad, that absolutely no one in authority has stepped forward to deny or refute these concerning findings so far either.
Thank you, Kambiz Tavana, my colleague from our other studio in Washington. Regarding this war between the United States and the Islamic Republic, a joint Reuters-Ipsos poll shows that most Americans view the 5-month war with Iran as a cause of chaos in the Middle East, and only 35% support this military campaign. Patrick Lawson, senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and expert on Iran and Middle East affairs, joins us from Washington. Mr. Clausen, thank you for accepting our invitation. It was clear from the very beginning that there wasn't much appetite in American society for a prolonged war. Mr. Trump knew this as well, entering with a hope of what seemed like a short war, perhaps similar to Venezuela. But now it seems like the situation on the ground has become such that Mr. Trump might have no choice but to keep this war going. How do you think he can find a balance between this American society, where a huge number of people are strongly opposed to war, and the uneven conditions of the Middle East?
He's proven in the past that he's a good salesman, and well, his victory in the 2016 and 2024 elections was surprising to a lot of people. But well, recently he's run into difficulties, and it's not clear how he wants to sell us this possibility of war this time. Naturally, he has to try really hard. Up until now, he's been reluctant and hesitant to give a serious speech about this. He's tweeted a lot, but well, he hasn't had a serious speech. He needs to talk more and bring up more details with the American people. Make it clear to them that all available alternatives are deeply flawed, and convince them that continuing the ongoing military effort, despite its tremendous costs, remains a far better and more necessary strategic path than accepting defeat and surrendering directly to Iran's regional demands.
How do you think we got here? Iran isn't Djibouti, you know. Plenty of satellites, plenty of intelligence services. Israel, the United States, Britain have been monitoring Iran for years. What do you think happened that the assessments were so inaccurate, making the war so attritional?
Tactical intelligence, the granular, day-to-day operational data provided by both Israeli and American apparatuses, proved extraordinarily accurate. Security agencies were able to pinpoint highly specific target locations, including Khamenei's exact whereabouts when contemplating action, resulting in remarkable successes on a tactical level. However, when evaluating strategic intelligence, the essential understanding of internal Iranian politics, factional dynamics, and domestic political reactions across Iran, they performed terribly. This profound deficit in strategic foresight left leadership ill-prepared for the broader political fallout. Compounding the problem further was a pervasive political reluctance to seek external guidance, as neither administration demonstrated any interest in talking to or consulting with seasoned diplomatic and academic experts on Iranian affairs who could have addressed these critical analytical gaps. They kept key issues restricted to a tight inner circle. For instance, President Trump heavily relied on trusted figures like his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and business partner Steve Witkoff. As a result, they didn't really utilize or benefit from subject experts and experienced diplomats. Similarly, in Israel, there was a major misunderstanding. Officials had a fundamentally wrong understanding of how the political system works in Iran, failing to realize how deeply committed the leadership in Iran is to firmly insisting on its core strategic positions. President Trump frequently approaches international diplomacy with the mindset of a New York real estate developer, operating under the belief that presenting a lucrative proposal alongside unpleasant alternatives will naturally compel the opposing party to accept his terms. However, real-world geopolitics rarely follows commercial logic. In practice, this transactional strategy has proven ineffective, particularly with deeply ideological adversaries. When the very foundation and core nature of the Islamic Republic are questioned, for instance, its leadership is unwilling to step back even an inch. Instead of yielding to diplomatic leverage, they flatly refuse to offer any meaningful concessions or compromise on their sovereignty and underlying political principles.
It seems that initially one of the options was regime change. The Israelis were talking about it very prominently. And Mr. Trump, too, if you remember, in that initial speech of his, was at least telling the protesters in Iran that this might be a historic opportunity that might not come by easily again. So he didn't seem to oppose to changing the government in Iran either. Do you think that capacity still exists in Iran? Because the Islamic Republic isn't just at enmity with the US, Israel, and regional countries. It's also one of the most unpopular ruling governments in the world.
As you correctly noted, this regime suffers from widespread public, unpopularity. However, its core cadre of loyal supporters remains fiercely committed to maintaining its rule, and they have repeatedly demonstrated an absolute willingness to resort to lethal violence to preserve their hold on authority. Consequently, we witness a relentless crackdown, where state security forces arrest hundreds of citizens every single day and carry out frequent executions. Undeterred even by the ongoing pressures of war, they simply will not tolerate any form of public dissent or protest. Regrettably, when a ruthless, highly committed minority is fully prepared to commit murder and suppress the population to keep the current government intact and maintain their status, dislodging or overthrowing such an entrenched regime becomes an extraordinarily difficult challenge for any opposition movement. They are sure, they're certain that they are standing on God's side, and that God is on their side, and that they are doing the right thing. And well, changing their approach will be very difficult.
Thank you, Patrick Clausen, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and expert on Iran and Middle East affairs, joining us from Washington. Agence France Presse says that in Houthi airstrikes on Yemeni government forces, at least 38 troops were killed and 29 were wounded. According to this news agency, this attack was one of the deadliest days between the two sides in recent years. The Houthis said hundreds of forces were killed or wounded. These attacks targeted bases near the Saudi border, and in response, the Yemeni Ministry of Defense announced in a statement that the country's armed forces will respond to the Houthis at the appropriate time and place. Alireza Nourizadeh, director of the Iran Arab Research Center, is with us from London. Mr. Nourizadeh, it feels like déjà vu. It seems like we've reached those peak days of conflict between the Houthis and the Saudis again.
Greetings to you and to all our dear viewers, especially my brave compatriots watching today. Regrettably, looking back at Yemen's turbulent history, internal civil wars and bitter regional disputes have persisted for 20 or 30 years. At a critical juncture, the Houthi movement steadily rose to power, a movement that Saudi Arabia initially tolerated and steadily supported. However, dramatic political gains unfolded, culminating in the assassination of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Houthi takeover of the capital, Sana'a. These chaotic events effectively fractured Yemen once more, creating a sharp division: the internationally recognized legitimate government established in the south and the rebellious Houthi forces seizing the north, which officially dragged the Saudis into the war. The Islamic Republic of Iran was likewise providing full-scale military and financial support to the Houthi movement. Within Yemen, at the Al-Daylami air base, Iranian operatives helped establish a dedicated facility for drone manufacturing. Tehran systematically funneled vast quantities of advanced missiles into the country, utilizing covert supply routes through Oman as well as maritime networks involving Somali pirates. In return for this extensive assistance, which included substantial cash flow, stockpiles of sophisticated weaponry, and expert advisors from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, the Houthis are now repaying their debt through bold regional military actions, following a series of strategic tactical maneuvers that allowed them to firmly establish control over Sana'a, expand into the crucial port city of Hodeidah, and subsequently consolidate their influence back in the capital. They remain steadfast partners to their Iranian benefactors. What happened was their recent attack on Marib province, which, well, is a very important and strategically sensitive area in the region. During this escalation, they targeted two key military bases located in Al-Ruwayq, where as many as 40 people were killed in the strike. This assault was carried out in direct revenge for a previous attack that the legitimate government forces had executed against the Houthis in Hodeidah, where 50 Houthis were killed. But anyway, this ongoing story is still continuing to unfold today. The Saudis showed considerable restraint and tried, through leveraging those old ties and diplomatic concessions they previously gave to the Houthis, to prevent the Houthis from entering into a disastrous full-scale war. However, when the Houthis successfully targeted and struck a Saudi oil tanker named the Wafa near the crucial port city of Yanbu, it clearly demonstrated that they have entered this regional battle with their full military strength. Looking ahead, I firmly believe that in the coming days, we will witness a significantly broader and more devastating conflict escalating between the Saudi kingdom and the Houthi forces. This escalation is particularly likely because Saudi Arabia currently feels much stronger, bolstered by the newly formed strategic coalition that includes key Persian Gulf countries, Egypt, Jordan, and Pakistan. Although Pakistan has historically served as a traditional military ally to the Saudis, it had spent recent years quietly flirting and maintaining diplomatic ties with the Islamic Republic. So much so that the Islamic Republic's Chargé d'Affaires in Pakistan said our relations are as strong as Mount Alborz. But in the end, Pakistan isn't going to leave the Saudis to cling to the Islamic Republic. 1.5 million Pakistani workers earn their living in Saudi Arabia. The two countries have close military and security ties. Pakistani pilots play an important role, which is why I believe the Saudis will now enter the fray against the Houthis of greater strength.
The Persian Gulf countries tried very hard to avoid getting bogged down in this conflict between Iran, the US, and Israel as much as possible, but increasingly, especially the Islamic Republic, has dragged them into the arena, whether directly by attacking these countries or through its proxy groups like the Houthis and other groups in Iraq. Do you think that the Saudis, given these attacks that the Houthis are launching against them, both on their interests in Yemen and in the Red Sea, might take a harsher stance and jump in full scale?
I was recently watching your conversation with my old friend Patrick Clausen, and right before that, your expert delivered a remarkably insightful analysis. Look at the ongoing situation surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. Naturally, ensuring security in this key maritime passage is important to everyone, and all parties are interested in seeing this conflict resolved. However, I highly doubt the Islamic Republic will ever settle for sharing sovereignty over the strategic waterway with Oman. They are simply buying time. Unfortunately, Mr. Donald Trump is a very poor buyer or seller in these negotiations, repeatedly coming out on the losing side of every deal. So I don't know what Trump will actually do, but the Islamic Republic currently believes it has reached the absolute peak of its power. Back in 2023, prior to October 7th, Mr. Khamenei genuinely believed he had become the vicar of God on earth. He thought all these surrounding countries were truly afraid of him, but October 7th completely altered the scenario, transformed the scene, and reshaped the region's geopolitics. Consequently, the Islamic Republic spent 2 long years in deep weakness and being battered. While its proxies were systematically destroyed, it was trapped in a very bad spot. However, the war ultimately helped it rebuild itself. He killed over 40,000 innocent people in the country. And I really have to say right here, Mr. Pezeshkian's recent words have made me feel disgusted by this man more and more. He killed 40,000 people, and the world didn't react. Now, he's brazenly come onto the scene saying, I'll strike these Arab countries so much until they submit to me, until they accept my sovereignty over them. What's the result? Iranian schools that were in the UAE, in Kuwait, in various places for over half a century have been closed down. Iranian organizations are being shut down. They're kicking them out. In the end, the Islamic Republic won't be the winner of this confrontation, and the Saudis are definitely planning right now to not just sit idly by. First and foremost regarding the Houthis and Hashd al-Shabi, and then with the Islamic Republic itself.
In the bigger picture, I don't know, but in limited tactical attacks, well, the Islamic Republic has had achievements. Just a few minutes ago, Mr. Nourizadeh, Mohammed Bakr Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Islamic Republic's parliament, and a senior negotiator, posted on X, saying, one day they talk about a massive attack, then they talk about negotiations. This is the same showy diplomacy that keeps repeating. Accept reality and fulfill your commitments. Doesn't this show that the Islamic Republic has pretty much read Mr. Trump's playbook and knows that these serious threats of his to hit infrastructure, to hit Iran's facilities, are probably bargaining chips? And if they really have such an impression that a huge rock is a sign of not throwing it, how much does this weaken America's hand in negotiations?
So far, this assessment of the Islamic Republic has been correct. Look, let's not forget something. The individuals seated over there are ruthless criminals and murderers, yet they possess a sharp Iranian shrewdness. Having maintained power for 47 years, they have thoroughly mastered the geopolitical game and accurately assessed Trump from the very beginning. Under leaders like Obama or Joe Biden, their strategic calculations were straightforward. They knew those administrations would avoid direct warfare, while applying severe diplomatic and economic pressure to crush them. They ultimately negotiated and signed the JCPOA, and Rouhani Rouhani was prepared to sign a second agreement before Khamenei intervened and blocked it. Now the Islamic Republic senses a very different dynamic unfolding. When you yourselves aired it 10 times today that voting in America is against war, they are opposed to war, Trump has an upcoming election. When you put all of these together and then he comes out supporting J.D. Vance for the presidency, what message does that send to Tehran? This guy is not a man of war. He wants to make a deal. We can push and get more concessions. Under pressure, it doesn't go to war with the US. It doesn't with Israel. It hits Kuwait with its missiles. They will inevitably target Saudi Arabia next, while the UAE paid tribute in hopes of being spared for a short while. Ultimately, the Islamic Republic's destructive poison will be dumped on all regional states, unless they stand together as a resolute, united force using the very pact they have signed. Otherwise, as you rightly stated, I completely agree with your assessment. The Islamic Republic has historically relied on sheer aggressive bullying to extract major geopolitical concessions up until now. Because this tactic has consistently worked in the past, the regime's leadership confidently assumes it can continue using the exact same aggressive extortion to extract even more concessions today. I won't lose anything. I've killed people, silenced voices, and outside I'm hooliganing, pulling knives, and I can achieve my goals.
Thank you, Alireza Nourizadeh, Arab and Iranian Studies Director in London. In response to regional tensions and Saudi Arabia's concerns over maritime threats, Riyadh has announced the formation of a multinational maritime defense coalition, a coalition aimed at strengthening shipping security in the Red Sea. The Saudi Ministry of Defense said that experience in counter-mine operations and countering drones in the region played a role in forming this coalition. Saudi Arabia is set to host the command center and permanent headquarters of this coalition. At the same time, the Chief of General Staff of the Saudi Armed Forces discussed ways to enhance joint defense cooperation and coordination with his British counterpart. Farzeen Nadimi, Senior Fellow for Defense and Security Affairs at the Washington Institute, joins us from Washington. Mr. Nadimi, generally speaking, how effective are coalitions like this and efforts to respond reactively to attacks by the Islamic Republic and its proxies, like the Houthis? Because these aren't like, say, Somali pirates, where you can necessarily resist them with a coalition. The perpetrators of these attacks have sovereign states, and they can attack using drones and missiles right from their own territory. Can these coalitions really work in the long run for maritime security? Not at all. This approach is bound to fail entirely. Unfortunately, key decision makers have ignored clear historical precedents. Saudi Arabia itself spent years fighting the Houthis, and learned firsthand that adopting a purely defensive posture in the Red Sea does nothing to halt relentless Houthi missile and drone strikes. Similarly, the broader international community now has years of experience attempting to contain Houthi aggression in the Red Sea and the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Because coalition efforts remained strictly reactive and defensive, they yielded zero meaningful deterrence. Consequently, the Houthis remain firmly entrenched in power across northwestern Yemen. As long as they maintain control over this vital Red Sea coastline, they retain the capability to severely impact critical global maritime trade routes, economic stability, and international commercial shipping operations indefinitely. Shipping, and even the vital Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which they do not physically control, but by deploying advanced long-range weapons, ballistic missiles, and armed drones, they can still exert considerable strategic influence there. While Saudi Arabia initially, during those turbulent years from 2023 to 2025, wasn't inclined to join international naval coalitions because it held an active ceasefire with the Houthis, and it strongly wanted to maintain that fragile peace. It certainly wasn't interested in risking Houthi attacks against key infrastructure inside Saudi Arabia. That was a crucial time when massive development initiatives like the Neon project had really taken off, and he was highly invested in seeing the Saudi Crown Prince successfully move that transformative economic vision steadily and securely forward. But now they see that, well, with the changes in the geopolitics of the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, and the way the Houthis are following the IRGC's lead, the situation has gotten to a point where he just has to react somehow. Yeah, unfortunately, his actions have been reactive, but now he's realizing he needs to act fast. Even so, he still keeps emphasizing that this coalition that's supposed to be formed will be mostly defensive, largely so he can bring other countries on board and get them to join. Countries like Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey, and various nations across the Horn of Africa each bring rich maritime experience to the table. Every single one of them can play a major role in its specific region. Egypt dominates the northern Red Sea and strategic Suez area, while Pakistan has decades of experience navigating the Indian Ocean. Because these nations maintain large, seasoned navies, they possess invaluable operational knowledge. Given the training and knowledge transfer are super important for this coalition, Saudi Arabia is likely aiming to tap into this deep reservoir of expertise to significantly boost and modernize its own relatively small naval capabilities across these critical trade routes. Saudi Arabia has only recently recognized the urgent necessity to significantly bolster its naval capabilities, particularly throughout the strategically vital Red Sea region. To begin this effort, the kingdom has acquired a few new vessels, although these currently remain smaller class combatants, including modern missile ships procured from shipbuilders in Spain and France. Looking ahead, Saudi officials plan to substantially expand and modernize their naval fleet with larger assets over the coming years. Naturally, a new coalition of this nature is intended to coordinate seamlessly alongside established regional partnerships, such as the European Union's Operation Aspides and the US-led Combined Maritime Forces, CMF. Working in tandem with these existing maritime frameworks, the ultimate goal is to safeguard critical commercial shipping lanes, deter regional threats, and effectively maintain long-term maritime security and freedom of navigation across these important waterways. However, the simple reality remains that the Houthis are strategically positioned right in the region, and whenever the urge strikes them, or whenever they receive explicit orders or subtle signals from their patrons in Tehran, they stand ready to disrupt vital international shipping routes in the surrounding waters. Indeed, today's escalation clearly illustrates this ongoing pattern as they launch a direct strike against a Yemeni army barracks, perfectly reflecting the aggressive tactics these militants routinely employ. This sudden offensive may well represent a preemptive retaliation against Yemeni government forces. Fresh intelligence reports emerging from the ground suggest that significant military troop movements are currently underway, hinting at upcoming land-based operations supported by Saudi Arabia aimed at decisively countering Houthi dominance in the territory. Maybe Saudi Arabia really has come to the conclusion that it needs to take a more active stance against the Houthis and their threat, now that they're squeezing the throat of the Saudi economy in Yemen. And now the Houthis have made a preemptive move with missile and drone strikes targeting a Yemeni army barracks. This could be the start of escalating tension on Yemeni soil, and we might even see ground clashes in this. Controlling the high seas is a matter of prestige for the US, and historically, the empires that controlled the seas usually had the upper hand, from the Portuguese to the Dutch, later the British, and in the last century, the United States of America. Is this something that you think the Americans would just easily let the Islamic Republic and its proxies put at risk? Or, in the bigger picture, do you think this will trigger a major strategy shift, and the US will meaningfully confront all this insecurity? Basically, the US Navy was created to oversee and ensure freedom of navigation worldwide. Its current structure, with regional commands stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean and beyond, is set up precisely so it can maintain a permanent presence. This global deployment guarantees open maritime transit, not just for the US, but to protect international freedom of navigation for all. Normally, no foreign power should be allowed to restrict passage in strategic waterways like the Indian Ocean and other international seas. In the extraordinarily sensitive and strategically vital maritime corridors of the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb, hostile actors, specifically the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, alongside Russian interests, have increasingly exerted control and asserted influence over global trade routes. While the Trump administration frequently demonstrated an unpredictable, unconventional approach to international relations that at times appeared to reframe traditional understandings of freedom of navigation, the broader American political and military establishment holds a deeply entrenched perspective. The U.S. defense apparatus simply will not tolerate long-term disruptions or hostile dominance over these critical commercial shipping lanes. Even if immediate military interventions are postponed, the United States will undoubtedly reassert its role as the primary guarantor of regional maritime security within the next 2 or 3 years. This strategic necessity extends far beyond managing localized Middle Eastern instability. It is intimately tied to global superpower competition. The Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf function as a primary energy bottleneck for China's massive industrial economy, supplying a vast portion of its imported crude oil. If Washington intends agreements to successfully project power, deter aggression, and counter Chinese dominance across the broader Indo-Pacific theater. Maintaining a potent military posture at its Western maritime nexus is essential. For this reason, the notion that the United States can completely disengage, turn its back, or permanently withdraw from the Middle East is entirely unrealistic and detached from grand strategic reality. At present, the Islamic regime in Tehran and the IRGC leadership feel confident, believing they have secured a decisive strategic trump card by threatening commercial transit through these choke points. However, experienced policymakers, intelligence officials, and defense strategists in Washington view any current policy lulls or tactical retreats as strictly temporary accommodations. Whatever informal arrangements or precarious standoffs exist today are bound to be short-lived. The United States Navy and its ally partners possess unmatched operational capabilities, and they will systematically adapt to these emerging threat vectors and altered security conditions. Ultimately, there is zero ambiguity regarding Washington's long-term trajectory. Ensuring open seas, protecting commerce, and restoring absolute freedom of navigation will remain a non-negotiable cornerstone of American global doctrine.
I want to take you back to southern Iran again. In Iran, after social media users reported hearing the sound of an explosion in Kashmir Bandar Abbas, the political and security deputy of the Hormozgan governorate almost, in a way, denied the news and said the necessary investigations are being conducted by the responsible agency to identify the source of the heard sound. But no casualties have been reported, and no signs of an explosion have been seen either, but they are investigating. The Fahid online channel had also published this news, citing messages from the public. UN special rapporteurs warned about the increasing crackdown on ethnic minorities in Iran and urged the Islamic Republic to stop the arbitrary detention, torture, and execution of Kurds and Baluch. According to this statement, in just the past 7 months, at least 24 Baluch citizens and 22 Kurd citizens have been executed. Continuing these warnings, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights declared that in about the past 4.5 months, at least 56 political prisoners have been executed in Iran, and more than 100 others are at risk of execution. Volker Turk said the Islamic Republic uses the death penalty to instill fear and suppress opponents.
My colleague Mariam Rahmati is with us from UN headquarters in New York. Obviously, Mariam, this wave of executions has worried the international community as well. Even the UN, which faces criticism in many cases, has spoken out. What kind of things, what actions has this organization taken so far?
United Nations officials and independent human rights experts have voiced profound alarm regarding the rapidly worsening human rights conditions across Iran. Over the past 48 hours, this heightening international concern has culminated in 2 distinct official statements, highlighting the alarming surge in executions carried out by the Islamic Republic in the wake of the widespread day-month protests. According to the latest statement released today by independent UN human rights experts, Iranian authorities launched a sweeping crackdown immediately following the outbreak of the day-month demonstrations, resulting in the arbitrary detention of thousands of peaceful protesters, community leaders, and dissidents. The experts documented highly disturbing reports revealing that state security forces systematically subjected detainees to severe physical torture and other forms of harsh ill treatment, specifically designed to extract coerced confessions. In several distressing cases, individuals were subjected to enforced disappearance immediately following their initial arrest, leaving their anxious families in complete agony without any official information regarding their physical well-being, legal status, or current whereabouts. Furthermore, UN experts underscored a dramatic and disproportionate escalation in the systematic targeting, arrest, and prosecution of ethnic minority populations, with a particular focus on marginalized Kurdish and Baluch communities. These individuals are routinely charged under vague, overly broad national security laws, with court proceedings that independent experts condemn as heavily politically motivated legal mechanisms designed to crush dissent, dismantle civil society, and strike fear into potential political opponents. The statistical figures detailed in the official report present a remarkably grim reality. In 2026 alone, state authorities have officially announced the executions of at least 24 Baluch citizens and 22 Kurdish citizens. Scores of additional detainees currently remain held on death row, facing the imminent threat of capital punishment following summary judicial proceedings that disregard international standards. The UN panel also expressed harsh criticism toward new legislation enacted by the Islamic Republic in 2025, which drastically expanded the official legal definition of espionage. Experts noted that this law, alongside long-standing capital charges such as Moharebe, enmity against God, and corruption on earth, is routinely weaponized, most notably against Kurdish citizens, to systematically erode basic civil liberties and suppress all forms of socio-political dissent. In another part of the statement, UN experts emphasized that state-sponsored pressure on ethnic minorities and activists is no longer confined within the country's geographical borders. The Islamic Republic has increasingly turned to aggressive transnational repression, utilizing direct physical threats, digital surveillance, and extraterritorial prosecution against activists operating abroad, a concerning trend that is growing day by day. Finally, regarding the imminent executions that might occur in the coming days, UN experts remain deeply apprehensive, warning that without immediate global attention, many more individuals face tragic outcomes under this punitive apparatus.
We're out of time. Thanks to Mariam Rahmati from New York, and thank you for watching.
What happened? Why did she keep going? Didn't you tell her the time? That's weird. Thank you.